It turns out that John Wood from the little city of Wausau, Wisconsin, flying a plane called Waco of Wausau. He was ahead on the points. And so the news kept coming back to Wausau. John is going to win. He's ahead as he's flying up the Pacific coast and across the mountains and across the Great Plains back. Wausau, by coincidence, was one of the stops on this tour. By the time the tour leaves its stop in the Twin Cities, and the next stop is Wausau, everyone knows that John Wood has won. And so he lands in Wausau. The other 30 or 40 airplanes of all kinds and stripes land, which would be quite an air show, believe me. And John Wood wins the Ford Reliability Tour. It is a tremendous victory for this little city of Wausau.
And so Wausau was put on the map aviation-wise by that activity and by John Wood.
Wausau's aviation fever came to an end in the 1930s as the city fell into the tough times of the Great Depression.
They were tough. They were damn tough, I'll tell you that.
The federal government set up a camp for the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, which put the unemployed to work developing the state park at Rib Mountain, just outside Wausau.
So I went in the CC camp, then I got $30 a month, and $25 went to my mama, and $5 went to me.
They were looking for something for the CCC boys to do. So they said, well, let's have a ski area on the north side of Rib Mountain. So they got the CCC boys to clear the trees in certain areas to make trails.
There's a lot of rock there. That's all rock. So we had to level that off a little bit. We had a sledgehammer, and you pound on a rock till you break them smaller, and they could ski on that then, when the snow come. And then they built the shelter house. We got all the stone, and then the masoners did their work, and we had to carry the rock to them. You work pretty hard.
A fellow from Milwaukee, Fred Pabst, put what was called a J-bar tow out at Rib Mountain. It was the longest one in the state, maybe even in the nation at that point. A lot of tourists would come up in the winter, and they'd run ski trains from Chicago, go through Milwaukee, and come up to Wausau. On the weekends, they'd have weekend ski trains.
But there was one area of business that survived the Great Depression in style due to the popularity of fox furs. The Fromm brothers ran a large fur farm that drew nationwide attention.
There were 4 Fromm brothers who lived out in Hamburg in a little farming area. And they were just obsessed with the silver fox.
In 1934, at the Chicago World's Fair, large crowds visited the Fromm brothers exhibit. The idea for the business began in 1901, when Henry Fromm was only 7 years old. In a magazine, his brothers saw the high prices paid for the pelts of the silver fox, a rare mutation of the red fox.
And they would pore over these catalogs, and they knew that if they had to buy a pair, they'd have to spend a lot of money. And so the children, Walter, I think, was 13, and there was Walter, Edward, Henry, and the youngest was 7, John. And they were all just as obsessed with these silver fox.
they began their fur business by capturing red fox kits in the forest and raising them in captivity, hoping to earn enough money to buy some silver fox.
Their father thought it was a stupid thing because he was not interested in it, and he thought, how could they even think about this? And so, but they kept on, and finally he said, well, if you want to earn some money, you can raise ginseng.
A plant that grew wild in the woods, ginseng was highly prized in China as a medicine. The Froms began by gathering plants from the forest. They pioneered new ways to shade the fields and developed new techniques to process the seeds and roots.
And it wasn't as profitable right away. So one day when their father was out of town, they went to their mother and they asked her, how can we get this money? And so she decided that she would mortgage her part of the land for $6,500, and they were able to buy a pair of silver foxes.
As they did with ginseng, the Fromm brothers pioneered new ways to raise foxes, including releasing them into the forest to grow in a natural environment.
And one of the outstanding things I think that they did was to give $3 for every silver fox they raised for research. And their researchers were able to come up with the encephalitis vaccine and also the distemper vaccine.
In good years, the two enterprises, ginseng and fox fur, generated millions of dollars in sales, and the brothers kept expanding their operation, employing hundreds of people.
Their operation of ginseng became the largest ginseng operation worldwide.
Their fur operation would grow to cover around 20,000 acres, also the largest in the world. In 1936, the popularity of Fromm silver fox was at an all-time high, and the brothers persuaded fur buyers to move the World Fur Auction from New York City to their farm in Hamburg, Wisconsin.
The buyers from around the world came. A lot of the buyers, they stayed at the Hotel Wausau, and they would bus them out every day, and they would inspect the pelts here.
At the Foxtail and Silver Fox Retreat, on the site of the Fromm Brothers farm, the buildings tell the story of the World Fur Auctions.
During the auctions, they would have several hundred people up here. They had the buyers who would sit in front naturally. They had Fox Movie Tone, I believe it was, that came and recorded some footage here for the newsreels. WTMJ in Milwaukee had a live feed of the auctions.
The Fromms put up a special building for the buyers called the Clubhouse.
The original intent of the building was to entertain the fur buyers. It includes a 4-lane bowling alley. A lot of the buyers that came here were from New York City. That was the hub of the fur industry. They catered to these people. And it turned out that they just loved it. I mean, some had actually referred to the whole property as the Fromm Resort.
While the Fromm brothers were putting nearby Hamburg on the map, Employers Mutuals of Wausau continued to grow, from a regional to a national insurance company.
We were mixing it up with the giants in the industry. We were insuring some of the nation's largest corporations.
But the company's advertising no longer matched its reputation, and it hired the firm of J. Walter Thompson to develop an ad campaign they called the Wausau Story.
They came back to the company and said, you suffer from somewhat of a corporate inferiority complex because of the location of the company in a small Midwestern town, far from the big financial centers. So J. Walter Thompson and the company set out to turn that perceived negative into a positive and begin promoting our heritage as a small Midwestern company located in Wausau, Wisconsin. The very first ad in the Wausau Story ran in the Saturday Evening Post in 1954. The artwork itself was Wausau at night, stars up in the sky, 2-3 people on the platform waiting for the train, and across the roof of the depot in big bold letters was the name Wausau. The depot illustration was never intended at the outset to be a corporate logo. But very quickly the company and the depot almost became synonymous.
Employers Insurance of Wausau has to make some pretty touchy decisions.
And they turned to television in 1968. There was a new news magazine, they called it, starting up, called 60 Minutes. And it was the audience we were looking for.
The word is Wausau, a small town in Wisconsin.
As one of the first advertisers on 60 Minutes and one of the most consistent advertisers on 60 Minutes, Wausau Insurance essentially owned Sunday night as far as insurance advertising was concerned, and that was huge.
WASAH.
60 Minutes made Wausau Insurance famous. And in the process, 60 Minutes made Wausau the community famous.
WAUSAU. There's a USA in the middle, a WA up front,
That's
and another
fine,
U in back. That's Wausau.
Thank
As
you.
in Wausau Insurance Companies.
That's fine.
The business insurance expert.
Thank you.
From the beginning, Wausau residents showed a strong spirit of community.
There were a number of efforts to build community organizations and develop a community in the wilderness.
Well, Mary Hazeltine met Dr. William B. Schofield when he came to this area, and he came here actually to buy some lumber for his farm in Mineral Point. But then he decided that this was such a great opportunity and such a beautiful area to stay. And so he bought a mill on the Eau Claire River. But then in 1863 he died, and Mary, with her brother Charles, ran the Schofield Mill. It was very unusual for a woman to run a company in those days. But she had strong leadership abilities, and after about 10 years of doing that, she moved back to Wausau and built a huge house, and she bought the whole entire block. Now the house that she built had 10 bedrooms, so it was very large, but that became the center for the women, and that's where many of the organizations were started and founded. One of them, very early on, in 1877, was the Ladies' Literary Society. There were only 3 of these in Wisconsin, one in Milwaukee, one in Green Bay, and one in Wausau. They did study, art, music, philanthropy. It was a wide range, and they took these things very seriously. But the Ladies' Literary Society also did things like ask the city to provide street signs so people could find their way. And also they were encouraging the city to hire the first policewoman, which they did.
A member of the Ladies' Literary Society, Helen Van Vechten ran a publishing business called the Philosopher Press and became widely known as a printer and binder of handcrafted books.
One of the things that Helen did was to hand do all of these beautiful classic books, and they did wonderful work in the arts and crafts style. Helen was like a magnet, and all of the really intelligent people in Wausau would come to the Philosopher Press building, and they would sit around and discuss philosophy or the latest book that she published. They were called the Philosophers.
Van Vechten served on the library board, helping to raise money to build the city's first library. When Wausau Group leader Walter Alexander donated land for the building, the project became a reality.
When the old lumbermen came here originally and decided that they were going to continue to live here, they weren't going to move, just have businesses and live someplace else. Once they made that decision, they developed this philanthropic philosophy. geared on the idea that whatever we needed to make this a better community, we would do, and every project that we started would finish up successfully.
They set up foundations, and that money is still providing a lot of help to different nonprofit organizations, and it's a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Carrying on the spirit of community building, the Lee Yawkey Woodson Art Museum began in 1972, when Alice and John Forrester decided to convert their home into a community art museum. The daughters of Wausau Group member A.P. Woodson, Alice Forrester and her sisters wanted to dedicate the museum to the memory of their mother, Lee Yawkey Woodson, who inspired them with her love of beauty and the arts.
Mr. and Mrs. Forrester knew the great Wisconsin painter Owen Grommy through the wonderful Birds of Wisconsin project and other painting work that Mr. Grommy did. They called Owen, Mr. Grommy, their good friend. They told him about the museum that would be opening in some months' time, and they said, we need an exhibition, you know, what do you think? And Mr. Grommy said, well, I could call a couple dozen of my friends and ask them to send a painting or two under the theme of birds of the lakes, fields, and forests. And that would just make a wonderful exhibition for the fall in north central Wisconsin. The hope was that, well, if a few hundred people came, wouldn't that be marvelous? And some 8 weeks later, 8,000 people had come. And so, you know, it's not rocket science. Our visitors like this. Let's do it again.
Now in its fourth decade, the exhibit Birds in Art draws artists from around the world. And with its founders' commitment to free admission, the Lee Yawkey Woodson Art Museum helped make Wausau a regional and international center for the arts. The Wausau spirit of community building continued in the 1980s with an effort to renovate the Grand Theater, an aging movie house and performance center in downtown Wausau.
There were movements to break it up, there were movements to tear it down, but the community rallied behind it, raised $2.2 million to restore the plaster work, redo the rigging and electrical systems, and they reopened it in 1987 as a performing arts center. It became very popular as a performing arts center. People wanted to see more and more ambitious plays and touring productions going on here in Wausau, but we didn't have the restrooms or the concession facilities. At the same time, we didn't have the dressing rooms, we didn't have the loading facilities, we didn't have the backstage that the artists needed to put on the shows that they were carrying on their trucks. So all of those things focused our attention on expanding and renovating this facility so that it could survive for another 75 to 100 years. When we announced this arts block project, the community took hold of it and saw it as a way of renovating the entire downtown. There had been buildings across the street that had been there since the 50s big box retail buildings. They had been underutilized. The city said, let's take down those spaces. The owner of 3 of those buildings donated them to the city so that this could become an open space, highlighting the fact that we were expanding the arts in downtown. This block was the most intact historic block in downtown Wausau. Those 3 buildings were separated by 2 alleys, and what we did was fill in audience amenities into the 2 alleys, expand the backstage into a parking lot, and create what we now know as Arts Block in downtown Wausau.